who saw me last time when I was here, maybe 4 or 6 weeks ago, and Nancy was kind enough to say, well, would you address the issue of conventional farming versus organic farming? And I very unwittingly and innocently said, sure, I'd be happy to. And it's been a real fascinating discovery to learn more about both of those. And just as a quick disclaimer, in the state of Illinois, I'm only allowed to tell you about the books I read. So here are the books that I read for this presentation. And I'll refer to them. But there's a lot of good information out there if you're willing to track it down. And there's also an article on the back table there that I would strongly encourage you to read. It's the best I found. It's a little over 2 pages, and it boils it down to its essence about what's the problem with genetically modified food. And we'll talk more about that. Okay. Enlighten the people generally, and tyranny and oppressions of body and mind will vanish like the evil at the dawn of day. I think of myself as a town crier. I've got a message. I had an opportunity to speak at the Real Food Challenge that took place a couple weeks ago here at Northwestern, and was fascinated at the receptivity to this message. And I think it's an important one. And while there may not be 1,000 people here, we're going to tape it and we're going to put it out on YouTube, and we're going to get more and more people to be aware of this message. So who am I? Well, I'm a recovering hospital exec who's seen the light. I've become a wellness coach. I think of myself as a self-appointed health czar, but I sleep with a very clear conscience. And what I want you to know, the real key theme here of my talk is we have been misled and we are being misfed. And my purpose is to prove that over the course of the next hour or so. I've had 7 messages. If you look at the bottom of your first page, there's a summary, and you can check off and make sure that I cover all 7 of those messages. But that's the presentation in a nutshell. And what my goal is today is to make sure you never buy conventional food again. You're never going to look at food the same way again. I know that. All right, real quick, you know, Earth is flat, right? No, it's not flat. It's round. We know it's round. It took 2,000 years for people to come to that realization or accept that. Pythagoras discovered it in 522, and it wasn't until Magellan's crew came back that the common man accepted it. So what I'm going to tell you today is not that the Earth is flat, but actually the universe is flat. Did you know that? In fact, it is. This is a poster that's been hanging in my office for the last 30 years. I didn't know why I needed this poster, but I was able to take a picture of it. And the top of it, right down here, that's planet Earth. And you work your way up through the galaxies and the clusters, and that's the known universe. It's a disk. It's mind-boggling. So when I tell you what I'm going to tell you today, you're going to be thinking, I know that the world is round, and what I'm telling you is it's flat. And this is the common knowledge and accepted knowledge of the physicists, the astrophysicists who are studying it. So just play along with me and pretend that the universe is flat. I've got a twofold operating premise. Everything you think you know about food is based on an orchestrated process of deception. Not a good feeling, but again, there's a lot of evidence of it. And secondly, the foods that you are eating are more than likely, regardless of the source, regardless of where it's coming from, more than likely, it's contaminated. It's pure and simple. That's my premise, and we're going to go forward from there. All right, this is a picture of the dairy truck that used to bring my dairy when I was a little boy growing up in Baltimore, Maryland. Now, I've had a jingle in my head since I was 5 years old, and I'm going to share it with you. I can't sing, but just bear with me. I mean, after all, I fed you. You can at least listen to me, right? Milk and butter and eggs and cheese, fresh from the farm to you. If you don't own a cow, Call Cloverland now, Northfield 92222. That's been in my head for 50 years. But it's real important for this because this is where the deception is in our diet. That's the image we have of milk. Beautiful golden Guernsey cows in this very lush pasture enjoying themselves, right? That's the organic image that we have. This is the reality of it. These cows are chained to stalls. They're fed GMO corn, GMO soy, and now, soon to be, GMO alfalfa that just got approved 2 weeks ago by President Obama. The milk is then pasteurized to kill all the enzymes. And you know how they know it's pasteurized? Because there are no enzymes. That's the true test of pasteurization. There are no enzymes. Then they bottle it at different butterfat levels, 4%, 2%, or 0% butterfat. Well, there's a reason why you drink milk, and one of them is to get some fat. So that's milk. That's butter. Fresh, churned butter. Again, that's the organic image we have of butter. We think butter, oh, it's beautiful. This is what most people think is butter. This is the back of, I can't believe it's butter. What I find fascinating is that the first ingredient is water. The second ingredient is liquid soybean oil. The third ingredient is salt. And then the fourth is buttermilk. There's less buttermilk than there is salt in this product. Again, it's made from cows that are fed GMO feed. There's 65% butterfat in the U.S. butter. It's 85% in Europe. We water down our butter. And that's why the recipes that are European in nature, that's why they don't work with American products, because there's too much water. My partner, Liz Erkenswick, over here, two of her sons are chefs, and they can't use American butter for the recipes that they work with. Again, eggs. These are the girls in the backyard, right? Again, that's our organic image that we have, is these beautiful, happy little chickens are making eggs. You ready? That's how eggs are made in a factory farm. They're caged. They're not allowed to exercise. Again, they're eating GMO feed, whether it's either soy or corn. They're not allowed to be chickens. And my favorite part, you see that little thing up there? That's the sunlight that they get. That's the sunlight that these animals get. Do you think that would have any effect on the food? Any effect on their ability to produce good, wholesome food? And then finally, cheese. This is a picture from a Danish cheese mart. If you've ever been to Denmark, it's amazing how they roll out these huge barrels of cheese. Well, in fact, this is what we think cheese is. It's not quite so easy. Again, you've got the same problems with the milk coming from cows who are being fed GMO feed. But again, here are the ingredients: milk, water, whey protein, canola oil. Do we really need canola oil in our cheese? I mean, it's just, again, when you see where canola oil is coming from, you're going to have a slightly different perspective on it. Okay, so those are the four food groups: milk and butter, eggs and cheese. The questions that we're naturally led to ask are, is this safe? And is it the same? But it turns out that those are the questions that they want us to ask. Is it safe, and is it the same? And a little bit later on in the presentation, we're going to ask a different question, because what they want to be able to do is manipulate the information. And it doesn't matter what they say, because they're answering the wrong questions. All right. HMS Titanic. Your water is right behind you. Does anyone know what the relationship is between the U.S. food system and the HMS Titanic? They're almost identical, but there's one big difference. They've both hit an iceberg, but at least on the Titanic, they were honest enough to tell us that there was a problem. The American food system is going down. So these are the facts of the Titanic. On April 12th at 11:39, if you look up here, that's the crow's nest. And there were two seamen up there whose job it was to look for icebergs. Now, Ismay, the owner of the Titanic, wanted to get to New York faster, so he had them crank the engines full bore. They were going 24 knots per hour in ice-cold water. And they had two guys looking out there in the dead of night trying to find icebergs. And lo and behold, they found one. Right? And so they immediately radioed it to the bridge, and then the bridge said, we've got it. First they pulled back the power on the engines, the worst thing they could have done, and then they decided to turn the ship. I won't get into the mechanics of it, but they turned it the wrong way. What's really important is to understand what didn't they have on this ship that caused them to hit the iceberg. Here's Charles Lightoller. He was the second officer of the HMS Titanic. He was actually the third officer, and just prior to the ship leaving port, he was made the second officer, and the second officer of the Titanic went to a separate ship. Guess what the primary responsibility of the second officer is on a ship back then? Supposed to supply the binoculars. Here is this amazingly rigged boat with half as many lifeboats as they needed, but an amazing design and amazing construction. They have no lifeboats. And Lightoller, when this is brought to his attention by the crew, he says, "Don't worry, guys. We're going to buy them when we get to New York." And that's a quote from his granddaughter, who just revealed that a couple months ago. She thought that the truth needed to come out about what actually happened. Okay? So that's the Titanic, and it went down. The captain of the U.S. Titanic, in 1992, 80 years later, our esteemed President George Herbert Walker Bush signed an executive order called the Doctrine of Substantial Equivalence. Has anyone ever heard of it? No. It had two important principles. One, all food developed through biotechnology was regarded the same as conventional food. Secondly, it barred all government agencies from conducting any kind of research to test whether it was safe or not. Unbelievable, but it's true. And in effect, it's as though he declared, we want no binoculars. We don't want to know how bad it is. That is the effect of his declaration. It's the same. No one's going to test it to see if there's a problem. So here's the proof. Here's my proof that the Titanic is going down, that the U.S. Titanic is going down. These are the maps of growing obesity in the country. They don't have a color yet invented for 2010 because it's going to get worse. The amount of obese people is now 35%. It's expected to go up to 45% in the next 15 years. Diabetes is expected to double over the next 15 years. Heart disease has grown 23%, or excuse me, it's grown 85% in the last 23 years. And hospitalizations have grown fourfold. So that's pretty sobering. And you think that's pretty bad, right? It's going to get worse. One of the things that I did before becoming a wellness coach was to do a forecast of where is chronic disease going in America. And I couldn't ignore these numbers anymore. Between now, 2010, and 2025, you're going to be looking at significant increases in chronic disease. It's only going to get worse. And if you think Obamacare is suddenly going to solve this problem, think again. There's not enough money. There are not enough healers. It's not going to happen. So if it's so dire, why hasn't fill in the blank told me something? Why hasn't my friends and family? We are clueless about what's happened to the food system. My trainer, well, unfortunately, they're too focused on fat. They obsess on fat, and for all the wrong reasons, I might add. My grocer, 50,000 foods controlled by 5 companies. My physician, not going to happen. In 4 years of medical education, they're lucky if they get 1 hour of nutrition. They're too busy writing prescriptions. My public health department, this is my favorite. Do you know when the germ theory was invented by Pasteur? 1865. Their biggest concern is contamination because people haven't washed their hands. They don't. GMO, genetically modified food, isn't even on their radar screen. They are clueless about what's happened. My news station, they're not going to bite the hand that feeds them. Food manufacturers are the 3rd biggest source of revenue for broadcast media. My government, no, they got barred back in '92. So, slightly different perspective here. But people would rather believe a simple lie than the complex truth. And what I'm going to share with you today is the complex truth. And it's not a comfortable situation. And we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. So how you react to this is only a reflection of where you are in your willingness to accept the truth. And what we've learned is that people tend to fall into one of 3 camps. We don't know, we don't care, or actually 80% of people don't want to know, because that means I got to change what I'm doing. That's a very unsettling proposition. Who here has been to Iowa? This is a picture of Iowa soil. It's black. It's the blackest thing I've ever seen. It's incredible. It's a tragedy that they're using most of it to grow genetically modified crops, but this is an actual photograph from Iowa. But I think the quotation is very, very important to grasp. No civilization has outlived the health of its soil. Trust me, we're not the first civilization that's tried to manipulate agriculture. But if you forget the importance of soil, if you forget the critical role that it plays in nurturing the plant and providing the nutrients, it's not going to be a very positive outcome. Sir Albert Howard was the founder of the organic food movement, or organic farming movement, excuse me, and he was very active in England back in the early 1900s. But his whole premise, and this is an important premise to understand, is that healthy soil produces healthy plants, produces healthy animals that produce healthy humans. And it all starts with the soil. It's very, very important. And if there's an intermediary where the plants are not healthy, or if, say, genetically modified plants are being fed to animals, and then we eat that, trust me, we're eating genetically modified food, and we don't know it. So here's an important chasm that we have to understand. Descartes developed this whole concept of thought about the object and taking control of the object. And Einstein's whole concept of relativity is about the field and being able to coexist with the field. One is about conquer it, the other is about coexisting. And this is the conflict we have in farming. And this is the impact that it's had. If you can trace through the history of thought, there are 2 diametrically opposed schools of thought. All about the object, all about the field. No pun intended. Martin Luther, Sir Isaac Newton, Pasteur, all of these great luminaries were all about conquering this object before me. And it's now being expressed with the genetic work that's being done with Monsanto and the global seed cartel. How many companies control all the seed in the world now? 5. And Monsanto controls almost half of it. So then the other side, we have these other great luminaries. And this gentleman here, Justus von Liebig, he's the guy that invented fertilizer in Germany in 1840. And his nemesis was Julius Hensel. And Julius said, no, all we got to do is crush rock. Let's just crush the rock and put it on the soil, and that gives them the minerals that they need in order to then populate the plants. Well, there's only one problem with that approach. You can't make money crushing rock, but you can make money making fertilizer. What very few people know is that Justus von Liebig, just like Louis Pasteur, on his deathbed, recanted and regretted that he had done what he had done. Pasteur, in fact, said Antoine was right, that the environment is what shapes our ability to deal with disease. We don't catch a cold, we allow a cold. You never catch a cold. It's just you're conditioned, your immune system is more receptive to the virus at that point. The key to this is the American farmer began to lose the land the first time they treated the plant instead of the field. When they tried to conquer the object as opposed to address the health of the field, that's when it became unraveled. We're all connected. And this has been a premise of thought going back as far as Buddha and all the way up through Einstein. And then as much as we like to think we can conquer our universe, we are connected to it. It's an interwoven web, and we must learn how to get along. So, really quickly, first of the 7 points, we have been misled and misfed. Again, Jack Sprat can eat no fat, his wife could eat no lean. We all know that's a fact. Picture tells us so. The nursery rhyme reinforces it, and our entire food system is based on it. And we now reflect that. In the 70s, they changed the food pyramid. And as much as you'd like to think that it was the government looking out for your best interest, it was the U.S. Department of Agriculture whose sole purpose is to sell crop and product. It has nothing to do with health. They don't care about our health. All they care about is, did we sell, did we export more product this year than we did last year? Ancel Keys, he's the guy who created the diet heart hypothesis. If you eat fat, you will die. That is the premise of his whole research. He was born in 1900. He began to have serious regrets again, like Justus von Liebig, like Pasteur. Oh my gosh, what have I done? And in 1987, interviewed by the New York Times, said, I think we're making too much out of this cholesterol thing. Well, 1987 was when Lipitor was taking off. And then 4 years later, he wrote an article in the New England Journal of Medicine. That's the Bible of medical research. He said, there's no connection between cholesterol in the food, cholesterol in the blood, and we've known that all along. Really? I didn't know that. That's amazing. Unless you happen to be a chicken or a rabbit. We have been misled. We are being misfed. What Dr. Keyes failed to mention is that the study that he based his declaration on was actually, it wasn't a 7-nation study, it was a 22-nation study, and the 15 countries that he left out didn't conform to his hypothesis. He and an entire generation of lipid researchers kind of overlooked a basic thing, the sugars and carbohydrates in diet. And the difficult thing here is that in 1960, when the study was done, Japan's consumption of sugar was equal to our consumption of sugar back in 1840. There's a slight difference there. The other thing that he forgot to address is that cholesterol levels increase as you go up latitude. The farther you get away from the equator, the more you need cholesterol. Why? Because you don't have the ability to produce vitamin D. And the correlation is just a modest 0.96, which means it's all about geography. It has nothing to do about your diet. And the other thing you forgot to tell people is rabbits don't eat meat. And that's basically what they were doing in the study, was feeding rabbits meat-based products. And the most amazing thing happened, the rabbits produced cholesterol all over their body, which is what you would expect them to do. But this is, I think, an important quotation from George Mann, Dr. George Mann, who was the co-director of the Framingham Heart Study, the longest standing study of diet in America. The diet-heart hypothesis has been repeatedly shown to be wrong. And yet, for complicated reasons of pride, prejudice, and profit, the hypothesis continues to be exploited by scientists, by fundraising enterprises, food companies, and even governmental agencies. The public is being deceived by the greatest health scam of the century. That's a pretty bold thing for someone to say, but the important thing is, this is the guy who co-directed the study that was trying to prove that diet and eating saturated fat caused heart disease. Guess what? It doesn't, and they couldn't prove it. And it drove the scientists at NIH crazy. So we get further misled. They take what was already a bad pyramid and they make it a revised pyramid and increase the amount of carbohydrates in it. So if it wasn't bad enough, now what we've got to contend with is, if you just take what they were recommending prior to revising the food pyramid, the actual consumption of sugar in America is 65 teaspoons per day. That's based on actual consumption. If you follow the new food pyramid, you'll be delighted to know that you'll be now be eating over 100 teaspoons of sugar. You say, well, that's not so bad. Well, actually, the human body is designed to process 1 teaspoon of sugar a day. 1% of your pancreas is used to make insulin. It gets tired. 1%. The rest of your pancreas is designed to make digestive enzymes. It's not supposed to make a lot of insulin. And yet we keep pounding it, pounding it, pounding it with sugar. We are overwhelming our bodies with a toxic substance. It's more addictive than cocaine. And when rats are given a choice between cocaine and sugar, they will always go to sugar. 100%. So, point number 2, you are what you eat. We know that, right? We know that. But do we really believe that? Because if we really believe that, we wouldn't eat the food we eat. We are convinced we can rise above it. We are convinced that we have superior genetic makeup, and it doesn't matter what garbage we put in our can, we can rise above it. It's not so. And the research is bearing it out very clearly. Because what we have is a tale of two cities. Here's a typical food aisle now. This is brought to you by conventional farming at its best. This is about the plant. This is about the object. That's organic farming at its best. And it's about the soil. And it's about the field. Organic farmers obsess about the health of the soil. That's what they're most concerned about. Conventional farmers don't care about the soil. They just toxify it with fertilizer, herbicides, pesticides, and it's an overwhelming amount of product that's used year in and year out. And yet we think we can buy this product and wash it with a little water and it'll be fine. Or not even think about, I really, really wonder what's in this package. I wonder what they've done to make this product. We never stop to even think about that. So my son wanted to take me uptown, said, Dad, you need to read The Economist. I thanked him a lot, like I've got time to read The Economist. But this was a recent recent cover issue, was about a fax of a violin. It's for real. It actually plays. It's kind of mind-boggling. And I thought, wow, that picture reminds me of something. What is it? And it's this book that I read, Empty Harvest. If there's only one book you're going to read from this presentation, read this book, Empty Harvest by Mark Anderson. It'll really change your impression about the food system that you take for granted. It is absolutely empty. The soil, they've known since the 30s that the soil was basically barren, and it hasn't gotten a whole lot better. Here's a study done at Rutgers. This study is about 5 years old, and we're just looking at 5 different items from the produce aisle, but in every case I'm looking at total ash minerals here. In every case there's a significant difference in the amount of mineral ash in the organic produce versus the conventional produce. And we could go down this bunny trail. Study after study has borne this out. Trust me, conventional food is a shadow of its former self. So why do we eat food? Well, there are really 3 reasons. We eat food to produce energy for our metabolic processes. We eat food to replace the 1 billion cells that die off every hour. You have 100 trillion cells in your body, and 1 billion of them, by the time we're finished with this presentation, you will have lost 1 billion cells. And so you eat food. What you really want is you want genuine replacement parts. You want the best possible replacement parts you can find. Not something from the aisle at Dominic's. Get something that's actually going to rebuild your body. And then we want to make sure that we ensure our optimal genetic expression. Our genes respond to the signaling from the food we eat. The research is incontrovertible now, how effective it is. A very noted physician has written this book, Deep Nutrition, Kate Shanahan. I think she's a very talented individual, and she makes the observation in the book. This is on the last page. She makes you work through 300 pages to get to it. We are sacred vessels of genetic expression, and that's really what it's about. We are genetic expression, and the better the food we eat, the more pure the food we eat, the more we're able to express our true genetic expression. Real quickly, the field of genetics is in conflict with the field of epigenetics. Again, going back to our tug of war between object and field. Genetics is all about the control of the object. Epigenetics is all about recognizing that the environment shapes the genes. And guess what? The research is absolutely proving that our food signals our genes. A quote from Randy Girdle at Duke: each nutrient, each interaction, each experience can manifest itself through biochemical changes that ultimately dictate gene expression, whether at birth or 40 years down the road. It plays on and on and on. We are what we eat. And they've now identified 500 genes that are manipulated, are changed, are influenced by the lifestyle that we lead, the most significant of which is our daily diet. So we want to blame epigenome on the explosion, and the tragedy here is I don't blame people for overeating, because that's not what's causing this problem. They're eating food that is totally distorting their body's chemical profile, and they don't even know it. And their body has hormones racing through their mechanism, and it's forcing them to eat, not because they're bad people, but because their signaling is saying, must have more food. This individual, believe it or not, is starved to death, even though they're overfed. At a nutritional level, at a molecular level, this individual is starved. So we're not trapped in our genes. We are not jailed in our genes. We do have a choice. And that's really the premise of this whole presentation. Does anybody know what that beautiful field of yellow is? That's canola, grown in Canada. Canola stands for Canadian oil. It's made from rapeseed. Take a bucket of rapeseed if you're in a sporting mood, put it in your backyard, and see what happens, and see how much will be there a month later. Birds won't touch it, critters won't touch it. It's a vicious, toxic, and yet you go into Whole Foods, it's like it is the bee's knees. You got to have your canola oil. Well, guess what? Most of it's GMO. Probably didn't know that. So here's the growth of genetically modified crops, mostly in the U.S. It really started kicking off in 1997, and the latest figures are 2008. So we're up to 91% soy. Actually, that figure is worldwide. 91% worldwide soy, 73% corn, 87% cotton. Did you notice that your towels changed about 10 years ago? They don't dry the same way. It's because it's GMO. Canola, 80%. And my favorite, sugar beets. In 2 years, 98% GMO. They absolutely took over that industry in 2 years. And now we have alfalfa to look forward to. Keep in mind, it's the critters that you're eating that are going to be eating this stuff. It's the pigs, it's the cows, it's the chickens, and it's the fish. You probably didn't know that, but they're feeding corn and soybean to fish. So the fact that, hey, I don't eat any GMO, well, trust me, you are, and you didn't know it. So this is my made-up expression. If you've heard of the term caveat emptor, means let the buyer beware. I've made up the term caveat eator, let the eater beware. Know what you're eating, because up to 80% of the food you're eating is contaminated now. And if it's not with GMO products, they're making GMO enzymes, they're making GMO food additives, MSG, it's all genetically modified. So these are the 3 food qualities that you would hope to find in any given country: better, faster, cheaper. Well, it turns out you can only have 2 out of 3. And in America, we made a very deliberate choice. We did not care about better, and we focused on faster and cheaper. And we did it with abandon. And we're now, I think we're paying the price for that choice. We got what we asked for. Back in 1910 was when they first started manipulating the food in a significant way, and it was called refined. Isn't that a beautiful word? It's refined. Well, what they did is they took 100 nutrients out of the food. They destroyed the wheat bran and all the other products with it. Well, then people got a little bit upset about that, so they said, well, let's enrich it. Since we've refined it, let's enrich it. So they put back 12 synthetic vitamins and minerals. So if I took $100 from you and gave you back 12, would you feel enriched? I don't think so. Then we entered the era of processed. This was about the 1940s, was when processed food really came on the line. And it was really a result of the Second World War. When they had to make food for 2 million troops, they realized, oh my gosh, we can make food for everybody. And that's when it started. But what's really unsettling is that the processing and the food additives have doubled every decade since 1950. And so when you do the math from 1950, you get 64 times more food additives today than we had back in 1950. Do you think that might make a difference in how we feel? Do you think possibly that might influence our health? 64 times more food additives? Then we entered the era of hydrogenation in the 70s and 80s. Whoops, sorry. Did I forget to tell you that that absolutely causes heart disease? And what I love is that, I can't prove it, my theory is, and I worked in the hospital field, I truly believe that there's more margarine being served in hospitals than there is butter. Because we all know that margarine is safer than butter. No. It's unbelievable. And people don't even think to question it. And now we've entered the era of engineered food. And we think, engineered, it's so precise. They know exactly what they're doing. Well, we're going to find out they don't have a clue what they're doing. Engineering implies the sense of precision, absolute control of what they're doing. Again, nothing could be farther from the truth. We don't know what they've created, and the tragedy is, neither do they. My favorite article that I read was in Science magazine for this presentation. It was referenced in this book. If you really want a book that's going to bring you down, read Seeds of Deception by Jeffrey Smith. This guy deserves every conceivable award known to man for the work he's done to try to bring this to everyone's attention. But it's so unsettling what they've done, and what he points out is the total misunderstanding about what they created. And this one article that he highlights talks about the fact that the research scientists actually say in their summary that they've created an unusual protein that they've never seen before. And I thought, sure, Jeff, you got to be kidding me. So I spent $30 to get the article. And right there in the last sentence, and we don't know where this unusual protein came from. We don't know where this unusual protein came from. And yet we're eating it. And we think nothing of it. And that article, that study was done 25 years ago. And yet we're just blithely going along like nothing happened. So let's pull back the curtain on the food system, thanks to Toto, our little friend here. So let's talk about motherhood, apple pie, and milk. The basic, fundamental liquid of America is milk. And according to Peter Hardin, who's the editor of Milkweed, RBGH, which stands for recombinant bovine growth hormone, which is what Monsanto was trying to put in, shoot it into cows so they'd have a 15 to 20% increase in milk production. It was essential that this get approved. This was, to use a term, this was the lead-off batter that had to get on base. Absolutely had to get on base. So let's take a look at that. It's a $28.8 billion a year industry, the fluid milk industry. It's a big industry. There are 9.2 million cows that make the milk for Americans. That's a lot of cows, 9 million cows. That's, wow, I didn't realize there were that many cows. And you would assume that if you're going to put this artificial gene in a cow, you're going to do some research, right? Of course, we're going to do some research. Now, just to put this in perspective, this is $28.8 billion in 2009. How much revenue did Coca-Cola generate in 2009? $31 billion. And they own 52% of the soft drink industry. So, milk is important, but let's put it in perspective. So, I'm curious, would this kind of research pass muster here at Northwestern? The FDA, our champion of food safety, conducted no independent nor objective research. All the research, 100% of the research, was done by scientists that were working for Monsanto, ConAgra, and the other seed companies that were pushing this issue. The approval process, the FDA does have an approval process. When Monsanto delivered their research studies, it's kind of mind-boggling. It was 44 feet worth of information that the FDA was supposed to go through. 44 feet of information. But in any event, the approval process was based on two key studies, a 28-day study of rats and a 90-day study of rats. Wow. short-term study of rats. And that's what the approval was based on. But in fact, you need to do a study of 2 years or more to get multi-generational understanding of what's happening to this animal. They're now doing those studies, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. No details were provided. And there were several people who exercised the Freedom of Information Act requests. And they were denied at every level of the FDA, and they were denied at every level of the courts. For one reason, because it would threaten the profits of Monsanto. And we cannot release that. Wow, that's interesting. Let's not worry about the health of the populace. Let's worry about the profits of the company who's trying to push this product. Bacteria count. Prior to this whole era of genetic engineering, it was important that there be no more than 1 part bacteria per 100 million parts of milk. That's not much bacteria. But they couldn't pass muster. So a former Monsanto executive stepped in. She became an official at the FDA for a very short period of time, just long enough to change it to 1 part per 1 million. That's a big change. 100-fold difference. The RBGH that was actually used in the studies was different than what the formulation was of Monsanto's. Completely different framework, and yet they approved brand X, and then they let Monsanto do what they wanted to do. The other key point was that the bovine growth hormone needed to be destroyed during the pasteurization process. Does anybody know how long pasteurization takes? You heat the milk up to 160 degrees for how many minutes? 15 seconds. It's actually 15 seconds. And that kills all the enzymes, and it was supposed to get rid of all this hormone. Well, what they did was, after 90 minutes at an accelerated temperature, they couldn't get rid of the hormone, so they spiked it with artificial hormone, which then killed it, so they could say that 90% of the hormone was killed, and then it was approved. Wow. That's incredible. I mean, this is all written up in many books, many articles. It was like, I mean, Nancy, thanks a lot. I mean, I've had many sleepless nights since I've done all this research. But my favorite is no significant difference found in the study that was the one study that was done with cows. So that should give us a little bit of comfort that there was no significant difference. So let's take a look at that. This is the actual picture of the milk at Pete's Dairy. Actually, this is Pete's Dairy, Pete's Coffee Shop. As we'll find out in a little bit, I went on a rant about this whole milk issue. But it says here, milk from farmers who pledge not to use RBST, that's Monsanto's term for bovine growth. No significant difference has been shown between milk derived from RBST treated and non-RBST treated cows. No difference, no significant difference. That is a statistical term. That is supposed to put us at intellectual rest and comfort. That language was required as a result of a lawsuit brought against Oakhurst Dairy up in Maine by Monsanto, because they put on their labels that it was organic and it was RBST free and it was therefore better. Monsanto sued them, won. Well, actually it was settled out of court, but this was a requirement for the wording, and all milk labels have that. You can look at them. Every one of them says there's no difference. Now, I'm not making this up. It was based on 3 cows. There were 3 cows in the experimental group, and there were 3 cows in the control group. So we got 300 million Americans. At that time, it was 275 million Americans drinking lots of milk, 9 million cows, and we based the study on 3 cows, and this study was done by an undergrad student at a school up in Canada. But it was published in Science magazine, so it must be legit, right? It needed to be 49 cows for it to be statistically significant. And there were wide differences in the amount of hormone in the milk from these 3 cows. But because it was only 3, it wasn't statistically significant. Okay, so this is where it gets exciting. Monsanto is the big bad bully from St. Louis. Everybody, I'm sure, has heard of them. But this is their latest salvo in this war of propaganda. We have 9 billion people to feed. A changing climate. Now what? Producing more, conserving more, improving farmers' lives. That's sustainable agriculture, and that's what Monsanto is all about. Now, in the article that's back there, which I really want you to read, it is one lie after another. It is absolutely, patently false. And what we know in America is that if you tell a lie often enough, people will believe it. And that's exactly where we are. So this is how we make BT corn. You take this bacteria, Bacillus thuringiensis, and you take the genes from that bacteria and you put it in what's called a gene gun. And you shoot it into a petri dish at the equivalent of a .22 caliber rifle. And you hope that some of that genetic material sticks. Well, you hope it does because you put it on little filaments of gold dust. And what you then do is you pour it with antibiotics, and the ones that lived, the 2 or 3% that live, are the ones that you want to then put into the corn so that you can then produce the toxin in the corn. That's what BT stands for. You are eating a plant that produces its own toxin. And what they're assuring you, like they assured you about the hormones in milk, is trust us, it's not getting into your digestive tract. And unfortunately, it is, and there's research studies that prove that it is. You are eating a pesticide, pure and simple. That's what's happening. So that's BT. That's what BT stands for, is Bacillus thuringiensis. HT, this is, you've heard of Roundup Ready. They have many different crops, corn, soybean, they've got probably 4 or 5 different products. But what they contain is EPSPS. I tried 6 times to pronounce that. I'm not even going to bother. It's like, wow. And what they're doing is making this product that this allows it to be resistant to glyphosate. And glyphosate is what kills the herbs. Where it gets really tricky, though, is it requires 15 times more herbicide for a farmer to use Roundup Ready products than it does a conventional product. 15 times. So the illusion is, well, we're not going to use as much chemical. In fact, it's 15 times more chemicals. And so there's been this explosion in HT, explosion in BT, and this is my best estimate. This is an actual curve that's used in the farming world for crop infestation, the invasion curve, and I just decided to put a star where I thought we were with the invasion of genetically modified food. It's at the point where local control and management is needed. This has become a local issue. It's up to each individual to make the difference. And as I said, a 15-fold increase is what's required. The plants are not able, they're not as healthy in a genetically modified format. They're not as healthy, and they can't absorb the nutrients. The roots are not able to take them up, and then the plants are not able to take them up. And there's a lot of buzz in the farming community, but no one wants to take on Monsanto. And here's just one example of the casualties. Monsanto talks about increased crop yields. Actually, They're about 1/10 of what they used to be. And less dependence on fertilizers, we've covered that. And of course they say it's cheaper. In fact, it's like 15 times more expensive to buy genetically modified seed. So nothing could be farther from the truth. UK Daily, a couple of years ago, talked about the rising rate of suicide in India. And in fact, according to actual statistics, the Indian National Crime Records Bureau, in this 10-year period, 183,000 people, 183,000 farmers committed suicide. That's about 17,500 a year. That's the entire enrollment at Northwestern every year are committing suicide because they cannot make a living with genetically modified corn. So that's what we're up against. So Monsanto has been around since 1901. Anybody know what its first product was? First product was saccharin, a known carcinogen. And a few years ago, the whole issue of PCBs came to light down in Alabama, and Monsanto was brought to suit and lost, one of the few times they've lost. But this is what the judge had to say about Monsanto. They were found guilty of negligence, wantonness, suppression of truth, nuisance, trespass, and outrage. Under Alabama law, the rare claim of outrage typically requires conduct so outrageous in character and extreme in degree as to go beyond all possible bounds of decency, so as to be regarded as atrocious and utterly intolerable in civilized society. These are the folks who are manipulating food worldwide, and we think nothing of it. We're just, oh, what's Monsanto's bad? They're not bad. They're evil. This is evil incarnate. We don't need to go to the Middle East to find evil. It's just a couple hundred miles south of us. Okay, point number 4. GMO equals GTO. GMO stands for genetically modified organism. We all know that. But what I want you to do is when you see GMO, I want you to think about something very different. My roommate in college bought one of these. It's a GTO. It's a very cool car. Think GTO, genetically toxic organism. Simplify it. It's not modified. It's not engineered. It's poison. It's toxic. And we're led to believe it's safe. Here's a picture of 2 rats. One fed GMO soy. The other fed normal rat chow. Which is the GMO rat? Pardon? The one on the right. Is there anything different about that rat? And there have been countless studies done now. There are actually 72 and growing that have absolutely demonstrated without any hint of confusion that there's nothing positive that comes out of feeding animals genetically modified food. Study after study after study after study. Now, rest assured that ConAgra, Monsanto, and the other guys, they've done all their studies, and they can prove that there's no harm. But whenever an independent scientist does it, there's always an untoward event. There's a significantly greater death rate in animals that are eating GMO soy. So, citations. Now, have you ever heard of Pottinger's cats? Dr. Pottinger did a study back in the 30s. It was a 10-year study. He took 900 cats, divided them up into 2 groups. Fed Group A cooked meat and pasteurized milk, and Group B he let out. Go fend for yourself. What he found is that by the 4th generation, the cats that were eating the cooked meat and the pasteurized milk had died out. And the ones that then, in earlier generations, what had happened was they became psychotic. They started attacking each other. Does that sound familiar now? think about what's happening to society. So one of the, there's an individual, Richard Drucker is his name. He decided to sue the FDA to find out. He knew that this was all based on manipulation of information. He had access to 44,000 pages of documents, and what he discovered was memo after memo after memo. The scientists had done their own studies, and they had discovered all these problems, but they were being totally suppressed by the elected officials. And since then, thousands of sheep, buffalo, goats have died. I mean, when you really begin to do the research worldwide, this is an enormous, devastating issue for farmers. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine has taken a very strong position on this, and they feel that long-term studies are needed, and they were ignored repeatedly. The American Academy of Environmental Sciences, not related to the environmental medicine group, again, they said that one can no longer deny that GM feed is harmful to animals, and that if these animal studies are taken as a guidance to likely human effects, it has to be assumed that GMO food will be harmful to humans. So, have you heard of Surov's hamsters? Dr. Surov is a Russian toxicologist, just recently published a study last summer. He took miniature Campbell hamsters and over a 2-year period went through 3 generations, and the most amazing thing happened. By the 3rd generation, they were sterile. Not unlike Pottinger's cats. That's not a good thing. So, when you see GMO, think GTO, toxic organism. You deserve more better. I think this is really, really important. That if you go back to the orangutan at the beginning, they want us to ask, is it safe and is it the same? The question they don't want us to ask is, how is this better for me? They're terrified of that question because they can't prove it. And what I find fascinating is that organic farming has been around for 3 million years, and we know it's 100% safe. Transitional organic, it's much safer than this hand-drawn graph would imply, but there is a transition. But then we get out into natural, conventional, it's only 200 years old, and now GMO is only 18 years old. And with everything you find is natural now. Well, guess what? It's contaminated. It's not what you think it is. And the tragedy is, we know what's safe. But what we've got to start asking is, how is this food better? We need to ask, we need to be focusing on better facts. We need to demand labeling. We need better fields. We need biodynamic farming. If they can do it in Europe, in Russia, and in Australia, there's no reason why we can't do it in America. And we need better foods. We need to start demanding local and organic food with great intensity. So we need to dine with 9. On all produce is a little sticker. It's about the size of a dime, and it's going to have either 4 digits or 5 digits. If it has a 9 in the beginning, it's certified organic. If it has an 8, it's GMO. And if it has either a 3 or a 4, it's a product of Justus von Liebig. It's got fertilizer, herbicides, pesticides, every conceivable known chemical. So just dine with 9. And you say, wow, there's no way I can do that. That's just too expensive. So let me show you the hidden costs in your annual budget because you don't eat good food. There's a farm subsidy tax that we all pay with our taxes. It's about $600. The bell-shaped curve around this is, I've found figures as low as $400. I've found figures as high as $4,000. So I'm being aggressively conservative here to say it's about $600. we don't really know how much we're paying for the conventional farming that's taking place. Most of us have health insurance, and if you do, the average American pays $7,500 a year. If you ate better, you wouldn't get sick. But what we find out is that even though you have health insurance, it doesn't cover everything because you have co-pays and deductibles. So again, average American, according to William Mercer, spends $1,000 per person each year. Well, even though you have insurance and you've got the co-pays, you still got to go out and buy medications and supplements because you don't feel right. That's why we buy medications and supplements, because we don't feel right. $3,000 per person per year, according to the Kaiser Foundation, which is a very reputable source of tracking this information. Then we have this insidious hidden tax called the obesity tax. This is from a study done by, again, another benefit actuarial firm. $7,500 per person to pay for the lost productivity of people who are overweight. Then, this is no joke, the cost to run the FDA costs us each $1,000 a person. That's a lot of money. And then they're not even doing their job. And then I just finished a book about food and behavior, and it's written by a probationer who focuses on changing inmates' diets, and the 80% who changed their diet never saw the courts again. And what they took out of their diet was sugar, just one thing. But again, on average, we pay $260 per person per year to house the people who are not acting right because they're not eating right, in large part because they eat too much sugar. How much do you think we spend on organic food per person per year? Because this is about $24,000 right here. $60 per person per year. In America, we spend $39 billion on organic food on a $1.6 trillion chassis. Organic food is a rounding error on the food system, and yet people complain incessantly about how expensive it is, and they don't think about all these other costs that are related to the fact that we don't eat right. Michael Pollan said that the American food system is a catastrophe. I agree with him, and these are the hidden costs of that catastrophic food system. So what's holding you back is very likely you have these images of, well, I'm a garbage can, it doesn't matter. What me worry? The food's got to be okay. You know, my favorite from Back to the Future, when Doc comes back and he just starts pouring garbage into the time machine, and it ran just fine. There's no problem. But they did a study back in 2005, written up in Fast Company magazine. It's an instant classic. 100 individuals who had bypass surgery were faced with having to change their lifestyle. Change or die. How many of them changed? 10. In America, what we want is a Big Mac and a Lipitor. But what they discovered in this study, and it's a very important thing, is that despite what I've done today, which is somewhat draconian, you need to give people a message of hope, that there are choices and there's opportunity. And so that's what I want to share real quickly, is my story of hope at Pete's Coffee. Discovered that they were serving bovine tainted milk, bovine growth hormone milk. There are only 2 in the Chicago area out of 192 stores that they have. 190 of them were clean. They just happened to be in Chicago, and they claimed they couldn't get clean milk. So I did a little digging and discovered that the dairy that they were using was the same dairy that Starbucks used. And at Starbucks, they went clean in 2008. And so I called up the corporate office and said, you have 5 days. I said, make the change or you're going to have a problem. They said, like what? I said, I'm going to stand outside your store in a cow outfit with a sign that says, got pus? They said, you wouldn't dare. I said, try me. And I didn't bring it with me, but I've got the memo that came 2 days later thanking us for bringing it to their attention that in fact they learned that they could in fact get clean milk. And they were actually embarrassed that they had not known that for 2 years. The important thing here is one person can make a difference. You really can. And you think, oh gosh, it doesn't matter that I buy this or I buy that. I know it's conventional, I know it's got GMO in it, but it doesn't really matter. It does matter. Each one of us, it does matter. And when I read this book by David Kessler, by the way, he was the FDA commissioner that approved GMO. It was during his tutelage that all this took place. But he wrote a book called The End of Overeating. Great book. Got to read it. It gives you a great insight about what the restaurant industry is all about. It's a scary industry. But you read 2/3 of the book and he just pulls back the curtain and you go, oh my gosh, I don't ever want to eat out again. And then the last third is basically this message. He picks up Nancy Reagan. Just say no. And I'm like, wow. I mean, I wanted to shred the book. I was so mad. And then as I got into this presentation, I discovered he was right. Because that's where the power is in just saying no. Because Monsanto knew back in the late 90s that if you put a label on it that said it was GMO, it was the kiss of death. They knew that then, they know that now. But guess what? There actually is a label on food. It's very cool. This is the label. If you pick up a food item, box, a can, or whatever, and it says it's got soybean, corn, canola, cottonseed, or sugar beets, trust me, it's GMO. Put it back. Don't buy it. It's not worth the risk. And the point is, at a local level of GMO crops, we now have 350 million acres. Is this a tragedy of the commons? No, actually it's a war. You have no idea, but it is a war. And Sun Tzu, famous Chinese warrior, said, all war is a matter of deception. We have been deceived for 50 years. And here's the war map. This is arable land, GMO crops. And the biggest chunks are in the US and down in Argentina, in large part because Monsanto went down and took over Argentina, and those poor farmers didn't know what happened. But what we've got is 35% of the world's land is now GMO. You say, well, that's not too bad. Well, the problem is GMO is growing at 25 million acres a year, but we're losing 75 million acres because of runoff, population growth. So the net loss is 100 million acres a year. In 10 years, game's over. It's all GMO. Now that's not going to happen, but the momentum behind this movement is unbelievable. So to subdue the enemy without fighting is the acme of skill. What we need to do is stop buying contaminated food. It's not worth it. So here's an action plan. Stop eating contaminated food, starting today. Demand more local and organic food, and this is included in your little handout. Demand it from your local supermarkets, from your schools and universities, from your local restaurants. Ask them, what are you using? Where did this food come from? What farmer did you buy it from? Why are you using vegetable oil when you could use butter? And butter is 1,000 times better for me than corn oil or canola oil or peanut oil or whatever they use. And they tell you, well, it's vegetable oil, like you're supposed to feel relief. There's no relief in that. Join a petition to end the GMO insanity. There's 2 marches, Millions Against Monsanto, and the Tipping Point campaign, and the websites were there. But make a local statement. Ask better questions. How is this food better for me? All we're worried about is it safe? Is it the same? No. How is it better? And vote with your wallet. It's that easy. So last slide, just our little advertisement. What what Liz and I are dedicated to is to inspire, to prepare, and to guide our clients back to a healthy future. We do it one person, one family, one community at a time, and we focus on structural issues, nutritional issues, and emotional issues. So that's what we're about. And those were the points. Any questions that you all have? Well, thank you. Good.